I never thought a tree could cause so much trouble. Then again, in our neighborhood, even mailbox paint colors had sparked argument. The maple stood at the edge of my front yard, just inside the old picket fence. It wasn't enormous, but in fall it turned the richest gold you could imagine. My parents planted it when they bought this house decades ago, and I'd grown up watching its branches stretch taller each year. It wasn't just a tree. It was a marker of time, of seasons, of family. 3 months ago, my new next-door neighbor, Greg, moved in. He was a man who looked at property lines like they were battlefronts. From the moment he arrived, I could tell he liked things neat, controlled, and on his terms. The first week, he had contractors repaint his siding, install a brand new fence, and pressure wash his driveway. I figured we'd just be the kind of neighbors who waved but didn't chat much. That changed when he came over one Saturday morning while I was pruning the flower bed. He didn't say hello. Instead, he jabbed a finger toward the maple. "That tree drops leaves all over my yard. I want it gone." Just like that. No discussion, no small talk. I told him the obvious. It was on my property, and I had no intention of cutting it down. He narrowed his eyes, like I'd just challenged him to a duel. "We'll see about that," he said, and walked off. I didn't think much of it at first. People grumble. Leaves blow. It's life. But a week later, I found a note taped to my front door, citing some vague, local ordinance, and demanding I remove the tree within 30 days. That was when I realized this wasn't going to blow over. Greg was serious, and he'd picked the wrong person to push. I kept the note on my kitchen counter for a day, reading it over between sips of coffee. It was written in that kind of pseudo-legal tone people use when they're bluffing. No signature, just "your neighbor" at the bottom, as if I might mistake it for anyone else. By Monday, I decided to check if there was any truth to his ordinance. I went down to City Hall on my lunch break and asked to see the municipal codes about trees. The clerk, a woman named Carla who'd been working there for years, smiled knowingly when I explained. "Let me guess, Greg," she said before I'd even given his name. Apparently, I wasn't the first person to deal with his enthusiasm for rules. She slid a thick binder across the counter and pointed me to the landscaping section. I read through every paragraph twice. Nothing prohibited my tree. In fact, there was a clause about heritage vegetation being protected if it held historical or community significance. That word, heritage, stuck with me. That night, I called my older brother Mark, who's lived here all his life and knows the town's history inside out. When I told him about the clause, he chuckled. "You know, Dad planted that tree the same year the library was renovated. Whole block was part of some beautification project. I bet there's a record of it somewhere." The next afternoon, I dug out an old photo album from the attic, and there it was. My dad, 20 years younger, holding a shovel next to the sapling. A city councilman standing right beside him. A little golden plaque in the ground read, "Maple Grove Project, 1988. It was proof, not just sentiment, but history. And if Greg wanted to make this a legal fight, I was starting to think I could turn the tables entirely. I scanned the photo and emailed it to Carla at City Hall, asking if it could qualify under the Heritage Vegetation Clause. She replied within the hour, telling me to bring the original in so they could start the designation process. Apparently, it wasn't just about age. Trees tied to documented town projects had an even stronger claim for protection. 2 days later, I walked into her office with the album under my arm. She made a copy of the photo and pulled out a dusty filing box from the archives. Inside were yellowed minutes from a 1988 council meeting, including a line item approving them. "Maple Grove beautification." My address was right there on the list. Carla looked up at me with a little grin. "This isn't just your tree. It's a piece of the town's history." I left City Hall feeling lighter than I had in weeks, but I didn't say a word to Greg. Let him think his note had scared me into hesitation. Meanwhile, I filled out the application for official heritage status and marked the date of the council's next review on my calendar. The Saturday before the meeting, I was raking my yard when Greg strolled over. He leaned on the fence like he owned the whole block. "So you've decided when you're cutting it down?" he asked. I kept my tone even. "I'm looking into my options." That was technically true, though my options were narrowing in his disfavor by the day. He smirked like he'd already won and wandered back to his perfect lawn. I didn't even mind the pile of maple leaves drifting across his grass. In a way, they felt like my quiet little messengers, carrying the news he didn't yet know was coming. The council meeting was on a rainy Tuesday evening. I sat in the second row of the small chamber, the old photograph tucked in a plastic sleeve in my folder. A few agenda items came first: road repairs, a zoning request, before Carla called my case. When I stood, I expected maybe one or two polite questions. Instead, Councilman Harris, who'd been in office since forever, leaned forward and said, "I remember this project. Your father worked hard on it." His words caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the legal angle that I forgot there were people in this room who had actually been there. I explained the situation with Greg in straightforward terms, careful not to turn it into a personal feud. I showed them the photo and the meeting minutes, and Carla confirmed the record. The council members nodded along. It felt less like I was arguing my case and more like I was reminding them of something they already knew. When the vote came, it was unanimous. The maple was officially recognized as a heritage tree, protected from removal unless it became a safety hazard. They even offered to install a small plaque at its base, just like in the original project. I walked home in the drizzle, half tempted to take the long way just to savor the win. The plaque would arrive in a few weeks, but the decision itself was the real shield. Greg could fume, threaten, or quote ordinances all he wanted. This tree wasn't going anywhere. The only question now was how long it would take him to find out. And a part of me, I'll admit, enjoyed knowing the reveal would be entirely out of my hands. Greg found out sooner than I expected. 2 days after the council meeting, I came home from work to see him standing in his yard, arms crossed, staring at the base of the maple. A city worker was there too, hammering a temporary stake into the ground with a laminated notice: "Protected heritage tree, removal prohibited." Greg spotted me and walked over, his steps clipped. "Care to explain this?" he asked, jabbing a thumb toward the sign. I kept my voice calm. The town council voted to designate it. Records show it's part of a historical project. His face tightened, but he tried for a sarcastic laugh. "So you ran crying to the city because of a few leaves?" I shook my head. "I went to the city because you tried to force me to cut down something my family planted. Turns out the law's on my side." I didn't add that it was also on the tree's side, which, for me, was the same thing. He muttered something under his breath and stalked off, slamming his front door hard enough that it rattled my windows. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the sound settle. The fight was over, but the tension wasn't gone. Over the next week, Greg avoided me entirely. No waves, no comments over the fence, just silence, which, honestly, was fine by me. I wasn't looking for friendship, just peace. And with the plaque installation date coming up, I had a feeling the maple was about to become an even bigger statement than I'd planned. The plaque arrived on a bright Saturday morning, delivered by a city parks crew in a small pickup. 2 men in green uniforms hopped out, carrying a polished bronze rectangle mounted on a short metal post. They set it right at the base of the maple, angling it toward the sidewalk so passers-by could read it easily. It was simple but dignified: "Heritage Maple, planted 1988 as part of the Maple Grove Beautification Project." Underneath was a short line crediting the town council and community volunteers. I stood nearby, watching them tamp the soil around the post. As they worked, a couple of neighbors wandered over, curious about the commotion. Mrs. Keller from across the street smiled when she read the plaque. "Oh, I remember when they planted these. Your dad was so proud of this one." Another neighbor mentioned how nice it would be to have a bit of local history right here on our block. Greg didn't come outside, but I noticed his curtain shift more than once. I could picture him standing there, watching the little crowd gather, hearing people's warm comments. I wasn't doing any of this to spite him, not directly, anyway, but I couldn't deny there was satisfaction in seeing the narrative flip so completely. By the time the crew packed up, the tree had gone from being a supposed nuisance to a celebrated landmark, and with the plaque catching the sunlight, it felt like the neighborhood itself had claimed it. I knew then that even if Greg kept bristling, he was outnumbered. This maple wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to the town. Over the next couple of weeks, I noticed more people stopping by the tree. Joggers paused to read the plaque. Parents pointed it out to their kids, and one older man even took a picture of it like it was a tourist stop. It was small town attention, sure, but it gave me a quiet kind of pride. Greg, on the other hand, seemed to be recalibrating. The leaf complaint stopped, replaced with a polite nod if we happened to make eye contact. It wasn't friendliness, exactly. It was more like he decided this battle wasn't worth the energy anymore. I could live with that. One Saturday morning, I was trimming the rose bushes when he finally broke the silence. "You really went all in for that tree," he said, his tone somewhere between grudging respect and mild annoyance. "It's part of the neighborhood now," I replied, keeping my focus on the roses. "Doesn't make sense to fight over it." He shrugged, like the subject was closed. But I noticed after that, he started edging his lawnmower a little farther from the fence line, avoiding kicking up leaves into his yard. A small truce, unspoken but clear. By then, the whole thing had shifted for me. What started as defending something personal had become about preserving a bit of history, and maybe even proving that not every disagreement had to end in bad blood. Still, I wasn't naive. In a place like this, peace between neighbors could be fragile, and with Greg, I had a feeling it might not last forever. That feeling turned out to be right. Early one morning in late October, I heard the steady hum of a leaf blower outside. I stepped onto the porch to see Greg, goggles on, pushing piles of golden maple leaves toward the street. Technically, that was fine. Yard waste pickup came on Mondays, but he was directing every bit of debris from his lawn into a neat ridge along my curb. He glanced up and waved like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Just keeping things tidy," he called over the noise. I didn't rise to it. The truth was, I'd already learned the value of not turning every irritation into a battle. Later that day, Mrs. Keller caught me on the sidewalk. "Don't let him get under your skin," she said, nodding toward Greg's house. "Some people just need a project to fuss about." Her tone made it clear she'd seen his little stunt. That weekend, the wind picked up, scattering leaves across the entire block. By Sunday night, Greg's driveway was carpeted in the same gold he tried to push away. I didn't say a word, just raked my yard like always. There was a strange satisfaction in letting nature handle the balance. Still, it reminded me that while the heritage plaque had settled the legal fight, it hadn't erased the personality clash. Greg and I might never be friendly, but we could coexist, as long as I kept my boundaries clear and my reactions measured. And the maple, steady and unbothered, would keep standing through it all. By mid-November, the leaves were gone, and the maple stood bare, its branches etched against the gray sky. Winter in our part of Oregon was more about rain than snow, and the trees seemed to relish every downpour. I'd catch myself glancing at it from the kitchen window, reminded that it had weathered far worse than a neighbor's annoyance. Greg, meanwhile, had turned his focus to a new project, repainting his fence. I overheard him complaining to another neighbor about the cheap paint job the previous owner had done, though he'd only had it for a few months. It struck me that he wasn't really a man who disliked my tree specifically. He was just someone who needed to fix, control, or manage something at all times. One rainy afternoon, as I was unloading groceries, he called over. "You know," he said, gesturing toward the maple, "it does look better without the leaves. Less mess." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest he'd come. I just nodded. "It's a different kind of beauty in winter," I replied. That seemed to satisfy him, and he went back to his fence. The truth was, I'd stopped waiting for him to change. I'd gotten what I needed, a permanent safeguard for something that mattered to me. And maybe that was the quiet victory, knowing that not every battle ends with someone admitting they were wrong. Sometimes, the win is simply keeping what's yours intact. Spring came early that year. By mid-March, small red buds dotted the maple's branches, and within weeks, the first pale green leaves began to unfurl. The plaque at its base had weathered its first winter without a scratch, and I caught more people pausing to read it now that the sidewalks were busy again. Greg seemed to have accepted the tree's place, or at least decided not to bring it up anymore. Our interaction settled into a neutral rhythm. Quick nods, the occasional morning, over the fence. I didn't need more than that. One Saturday, as I was planting tulip bulbs, a young couple walking their dog stopped to admire the maple. "We just moved in down the street," the woman said. "It's nice to see a bit of history here. Makes the neighborhood feel established." I thanked them and glanced up at the branches swaying gently overhead. For a moment, I thought about my dad, shovel in hand all those years ago, and how something as simple as planting a tree had outlasted him, outlasted old fences, and outlasted more than one neighbor's opinion. That's the thing about standing your ground. Not every win is loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it's the quiet knowledge that you've kept a piece of your story rooted exactly where it belongs, no matter who tried to pull it up. And as the maple's leaves deepened into their summer green, I knew it would be here long after both Greg and I were just names in some town archive.